It's time to fix the media. We know it. He knows it. The media is corrupt. The show where every night is a celebration, because we all know it ain't gonna last. On tonight's show, famed civil rights activist Rosa Parks. And now, the man who media executives have referred to as the problem, Peter Klein. Welcome to Peter Klein Presents, Fix the Media. You know it, I know it, he knows it, they know it, she knows it, you know it. The media is corrupt. On this show, we seek to clarify our vision of the world by analyzing and critiquing the news media and entertainment media. You know, on the corruption of the entertainment media, because it's primarily the news media that we're talking about, but the entertainment media, they're just more covert about it. And they make it difficult for me to talk, obviously. It's that, it's mind warfare, right? It's Obama space lasers, that, right? As Michael Cravey famously said. But no, see, the entertainment media is all kinds of screwed up. Kids should not be in movies. I was watching the movie Melancholia the other day. If you haven't seen that movie, or if you have, you either love or hate Melancholia. That's all there is to it. There is no in-between position. I have no idea why that is, but it is that way. And what my issue is at the very end of the movie, kind of a spoiler, I guess, in a way, although you're going to figure it out pretty quick. A child and his mother, and the kid's probably 7 or 8 years old. It's a boy. And his mother and her very depressed sister get together on their knees under a little teepee made of sticks that they set up as a kind of way to help the kid in a sense. I guess that's the upside of it, believe it or not, because there's a condition in a situation they're in, and that is that they're going to sit there and hold hands as another planet called Melancholia slowly strikes Earth and destroys everything. So it's depressing. And the kid is, at one point, the kid's holding his mother and he says, "Mommy, I'm afraid. I'm afraid the planet's going to change its path and crash into us." And he was right. He was right. And he did a crappy job. I mean, it's a kid. What do you expect? So considering that by that point, you've just been immersed in this world for and this is not a sci-fi movie at all. No. This is almost like a horror film, because really it's just all about the lives of these very wealthy people and the two families that kind of you are introduced to, in the sense that there's a wedding going on between this woman who literally can't even make it through the night without screwing some other coworker guy. And it isn't like you think. Nothing I'm describing to you is like you think it's going to be. It is not a Star Trek movie. It is not a movie with a bunch of salacious sex kind of stuff in it just because she screws this other guy. No. She pushes him down and gets her wedding dress up and just gets him so that it can be done. I fucked another guy. I ruined our marriage within 24 hours. See, what did you expect? And there's a child in this movie. Anyway, it's a bad idea. So, back to the show. We analyze and critique all that stuff, and we determine what's real and what's fake, and what's good and what's bad and what's immoral. And along the way, we'll figure out how to fix the media. I am your host, Peter Klein, and this is episode number 9. Now, I apologize for the lateness of this episode. The reason is pretty simple. I'm having big issues with YouTube. My original plan for the show was to ride the YouTube wave until such time that I could build up traffic on some of the other platforms like BitChute and the others. But what's happened has been a little unexpected. I've covered some rather sensitive topics, and yet they haven't pulled the plug yet. So I guess that's a good thing. However, rather than see a burst of traffic from my show being so popular, I've actually been seeing a slow decline. Not to mention that they've been slowly cutting my subscriber base. As of today, it says I'm 10 subscribers down in the last 28 days. And when I say my show has been popular, that's a fact, Jack. If you trust the like stats, which I do, because if they're going to screw with the like stats, they're going to downvote the hell out of me or limit those like stats. But here's the thing. For example, I'll have a show like this one potentially that may only get 250 views. And the dislike count will be 0. But the like count will be 25 on average, let's say. Well, that's 10%. And YouTube themselves report that most channels, most broadcast or videos on the platform have on average a 4%, which I think is an exaggeration. But just using their stats alone shows that I am in the top 1% rated shows on the platform. So why isn't anyone suggesting or seeing my videos in their suggestions, in their feed? So not wanting to make the episode go long, I just want to ask you to please share a link to this particular episode or to the show or the channel, or drop my email, my social security. I don't care. Whatever you think you can do to help, and do it wherever you think it can be appreciated. Okay? I would appreciate it. Thank you very much. Now, on this week's episode, who was Rosa Parks? And, wouldn't you believe it, the media has failed to report, or dishonestly reported, a major demonstration in London recently, actually within the UK. And that was just 2 weekends ago, and it was an interesting one. We're going to cover that too. All that and more, so stay tuned, you stupid couch potatoes. And now we recite the pledge. So please stand for the pledge of pure virtue. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the vassal states of Clown World, and to the clever grift on which it presently teeters, one group of suckers playing God with smartphones and TikTok for almost everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you. And you may be seated. The year was 1955. The city was Montgomery, Alabama. We all know the rest of the story. A temperate and generally pleasant woman, a black woman, named Rosa Parks. She boarded a bus to make the ride home from work. Now, tired after completing a long workday, she took a seat in the front section of the bus, which is designated for white passengers only. A white man then boarded, and because there weren't any seats in the front section available, he remained standing. He didn't ask her to get up, but upon seeing this, the bus driver noticed and instructed Rosa Parks to give up her seat and take a seat or go stand at the rear. She refused, and the rest is history. Now, before I continue, let me just summarize by saying most of that account of events is accurate, okay? But as I've said many times, the media is a vessel for propaganda. And this story is one of the most propagandized in history, in recent history, okay? Now, I don't understand, Peter. The story seems simple enough. The arrest record can be verified. The bus driver and arresting officers confirm the story. What is the problem? While the events of that day back in December of 1955 do generally line up with the historical narrative, over the past 60 plus years, the framing of the story has been massively distorted, and the very character and essence of Rosa Parks has been twisted to serve certain interests. To begin with, 12 years before that infamous day, Rosa Parks boarded a bus driven by the very same bus driver, James Blake, that was involved in the incident 12 years later, right? After paying the fare, James told her to go back out and re-enter through the rear doors. This is what happened 12 years earlier. And he did this with all black passengers, right? Because the front section was just for whites. He made them, this is part of the bus company's policy, he made them come in and they'd pay, and then they would have to step down, go back out, and re-enter through the rear doors into the rear section of the bus, which is what he did with everyone. So it was not an exception. Rosa herself explains that she chose not to re-enter the bus when she was sent back out. She decided she wasn't going to get back on, and instead she just wanted to wait for the next bus. Okay? Now, many accounts of that incident describe how after she exited, the bus driver drove off without her, which is true. But you can see how just a slight change in the wording can completely alter the nature of a story. Many stories over the years also describe how Rosa was always careful to be sure she never got on a bus driven by James Blake again, given his rudeness and his attitude toward black passengers. Some describe him as having left her in the rain, too, by the way, in 1943. She wasn't just left in the rain. She was left in the rain with the zombies almost at her. They were approaching, ready to eat her alive, because it was a zombie apocalypse, too. Well, I mean, that's what one reporter said. But anyway, what the media rarely reports is what happened to James Blake, the bus driver, between his first encounter with Parks in 1943 and that infamous day in 1955. Only months after he purportedly drove away without Rosa Parks, he was drafted into the Army. He then served 5 years and saw action in the European theater of war in World War II. Now, numerous reports describe Rosa having been tired on that infamous day in 55, and therefore she forgot to check if the driver was James Blake, right? Having been so set on avoiding him in the future. Rosa herself denies having been tired and gives no other reason why she boarded Blake's bus when he was the driver. So she last sees Blake in 1943, and then that's 12 years earlier. And 12 years later, she still makes an effort to avoid him? Isn't it also possible that given the passage of time, Blake being stationed overseas for 5 years and other circumstances that go on in a person's life, that Rosa had no expectation of encountering Blake again? She could have easily just forgotten about him in that amount of time. Haven't you forgotten many things that occurred 12 years ago in passing? Right? Okay. The most significant fact that the media never fails to overlook is Rosa Parks was a lifetime social activist. When she was arrested on December 1st, 1955, she already had decades of training, education, and experience in civil rights-related matters. She had been the secretary of the Alabama NAACP since 1943. Perhaps Rosa's interest in civil rights was spurred somewhat by her mother, who was a teacher. The Henry Ford Museum tells us her grandfather had been a slave, but had instilled pride and independence in her. She later marries Raymond Parks, whom she once called, quote, the first real activist I ever met, unquote. Now listen to this. Parks studied nonviolent protest at the Highlander School in Tennessee, which is an integrated movement center dedicated to empowering the oppressed to effect social change through collective action. Now, this is extremely interesting in relation to the historical narrative. Highlander trainer Septima Clark recalled that it was there that Parks, quote, talked out the sketch of her December 55 arrest and committed that, quote, I'm not going to move out of that seat, unquote. I don't know about you, but I'd call that premeditation, which is fine, but it doesn't fit with the narrative. The whole spur of the moment reporting crap is in the media. It just doesn't hold water. Now, maybe this is a misquoting of Septima Clark, and maybe Parks didn't have all this all planned out at the time. So then we should consider that long before 1955, Parks had also actively been training others in nonviolent resistance as the founder and adult advisor of the NAACP Youth Council. Now, members of the council, according to historian Alden Morris, took rides and sat in the front seats of segregated buses and then returned to the youth council to discuss their acts of defiance with Mrs. Parks. Is this not yet definitive proof that she planned the act well in advance? Now we're getting closer to proof of such a thing. Now, I should stop here to suggest first that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to spend so much time on something so specific and so single an act of non-compliance on a bus. What would that yield unless done repeatedly, right? And what were the chances that anyone would ask her to move from the seat anyway? As I mentioned, the gentleman that was standing and couldn't sit as a privileged white person didn't ask her to get up. It was the bus driver that did, because it was the company's policy. 2 years before the Montgomery bus boycott, blacks in Baton Rouge successfully achieved partial integration on buses through a mass boycott. So a similar action was planned in Montgomery. And Rosa was at NAACP and Women's Political Council meetings where the planning took place. In order to challenge the Jim Crow segregation laws, they would have to justify a boycott, which required an event to serve as a catalyst, in a sense. In 1955, 3 different women were arrested for refusing to give up their seats. Rosa attended meetings where it was deliberated whether those women would be suitable spokespeople, suitable for the task of presenting that issue, being the catalyst, but none were for various reasons. In some cases, it was their criminal past. They had besmirched histories. One was underage, I believe. So Rosa fit the bill much more accurately, according to their vision, right? Anyway, so here it seems clear again that Rosa was perched and ready to pounce. Honestly, it seems like she was chosen as the figurehead and actively pursued arrest from that point forward. Lastly, regarding whether the arrest of Parks was planned, softschools.com makes a very damning claim. The site provides educational materials, including historical timelines, and this is for the education markets, right? Middle school, high school, and not college per se. Anyway, the Montgomery bus boycott timeline notes that on December 1st, before boarding the bus that evening, she, quote, had just left a seminar on nonviolent civil disobedience protesting, unquote. Now, I couldn't find anything to corroborate that, so I have to think this is incorrect. I think the seminar being referenced is the Highlander School, which Parks likely attended weeks or even months earlier. But be it the same day, weeks earlier, or months earlier, having confirmed training in civil disobedience destroys the legend of the timid, unassuming seamstress who just got fed up and became a hero. So to be clear, I am not denigrating the work Rosa Parks did and what good did come from that. I do suspect her true impact on the civil rights movement and actions along the way were pretty minor. I'm suggesting, however, this is another excellent example of how the media distorts history to serve certain interests. Who those interests are, I can't say for sure. Sometimes, like in the case of the Zodiac killer, it's just a simple matter of sell newspapers, right? In the case of Rosa Parks, the avenues in which to profit from this deception stuff are myriad. Let's look briefly at one example. Children's books. Here are just a few of the books peddled to schools, libraries, and parents and children. What do you think the chances are that these books tell the story in a balanced way, where the positive attributes of the true events aren't overshadowed by distortions or oversimplifications? Not very good, I think. This calls to mind the question, how truthful is any book published? Before the emergence of self-publishing, all books required a publisher, and all publishing had an editor involved. And editors are tasked with selecting manuscripts that will have a market, right? Be it fiction or nonfiction. And since we're talking about the truth, nonfiction, we'll set aside fiction. And that alone is the first strike against getting published, right? If you have something truthful to say. The American public at large prefer romance novels and fantasy to the truth. And I'm just stating it. This isn't criticism. I'm just stating what I think to be the facts. So books about historical matters are more likely to be punched up, right? To punch up the narrative a bit. Books containing important truths are rarely printed, and those that are printed are very hard to come by. I've got one cool trick to share with you. Goodwill. Go to your local Goodwill store, if you have one. you just might find an interesting read. The reason for this is that when someone dies or an estate is liquidated, their book collection is sometimes donated to Goodwill. And it isn't just books that exploit the name of Rosa Parks for profit. Let's say you start a company, you have a startup and you call it, it's a nonprofit, you call it Carry the Torch or whatever. And your mission is to promote justice for minorities in America. You might produce a series of Rosa Parks bumper stickers, keychains, and other assorted brick of crap. Proceeds from their sales would pay your salary and any luxury perks you might be able to get away with, even if you are a nonprofit. So to summarize, Rosa Parks is like any other historical narrative. History is a mystery. And surprise, if you're still watching this episode, you've earned some bonus info. You know, you can't cover the topic of 1960s civil rights without mentioning one man in particular, Martin Luther King Jr. But King's involvement in civil rights began in the 1950s. You might be thinking, how do King and Parks connect? Aren't they separate figures of the civil rights movement? Well, yes and no. That depends on whether one relies upon the other in a greater historical context. So, Martin Luther King completed his degree in theology at Boston University in June of 1955, right? Sound familiar? 1955? The bus boycott that was triggered by the arrest of Parks was largely planned by Martin Luther King. In other words, King became a national figure and best-known spokesman for the civil rights movement because of the role he played in that bus boycott of 1955. Lasting over a year, the bus boycott situation became so tense that Martin Luther King's house was bombed, and he was subsequently arrested as well. These aspects of that story are what drew attention to both the bus boycott and King virtually overnight. Now call it what you will. Fortuitous timing, the natural confluence of forces, or deliberate propaganda with tailoring for media consumption, right? You can't have Martin Luther King Jr., as we know him today, without Rosa Parks. I thought this photo perfectly illustrates how important they are to each other as figures in the movement. And if I didn't know better, I would say this is obviously a photo of their wedding. In fact, let's check with Cupid. Yep, Cupid agrees. I'm actually impressed by the intelligent use of propaganda by the civil rights movement of that time. And I think the movement was still authentic. In fact, any degree of whitewashing by historians since that time is a completely separate factor that I can't blame on the figures of that time necessarily, okay? But this is a very important lesson for us in the present day. If they had that degree of savvy propaganda back in the 1950s, you can damn well bet they still do. Over the years, I've received emails and comments from people saying things like, "Your videos have changed my life," or "I've become accustomed to your voice," and other corny sentiments. Those messages did get to me.
What a freaking nut job!
My plan is to focus on independent news production full-time, supplemented by my freelance work and, you guessed it, supporter contributions. So, if you've ever made a contribution to James Corbett, Tim Pool, or whomever, please consider doing the same for me. A one-time contribution by PayPal or monthly contribution by Patreon. For $5 or $10, patrons will get access to a weekly live stream I'm working on, which I'm calling Apocalypse Workshop. Learn how to not only survive, but thrive in Clown World. So head over to either paypal.me/TNN or patreon.com/Peter Klein and give, if you're able. And if you don't support my work, how could you live with yourself? By the way, patrons will get immediate access to all my videos from both TNN and IMS. I think it's well over 150 programs and documentaries. Welcome back. At this point, I'd like to switch gears and talk about something, again, media-related. You know, just weekend before last, there was a protest, a rally, whatever you want to call it, that took place in, of all places, London, England, and in also surrounding areas of the UK. Now, I was recently talking to a female friend of mine, good friend of mine, who lives in Scotland, and oddly, she was generally in agreement with me, with my position, that the Five Eyes nations of the world, which, would include England, everything except America should be leveled, just completely, let's say, restarted. But I do invite all the people to leave before we do. But anyone that stays would unfortunately just be leveled. And she tended to agree with that. But London isn't completely, the people are people, and they're not, I think you're going to be surprised when you learn about this. If you don't know anything about it, great, you're going to love it. But if you think or if you do know something about it, I think I'm going to show you something that might encourage you even further if you aren't already. But before I do, I want to share something with you. I have recently come to learn of a young woman actually, by the name of Rachel Flowers. And when Rachel Flowers was born, she looked about the size of a Barbie doll, basically. So she was in one of those terrarium things, and she was blind, according to them. And then they did, over time, as she developed, they gave her 4 eye surgeries, but she never could see. And now she's totally blind. So I want you to see what Rachel's done. And do you wonder, who's the guy? Who's the guy with the gray hair? Who might that be? Could be Ray Charles. He looks like Ray Charles.
Oh, Rachel, that was so beautiful.
Hi, my name is Rachel Flowers. It's been a while since I talked to you. I'm making a documentary film called Hearing is Believing. Lorenzo Di Stefano is making the documentary. And it's been pretty exciting. Just let change take hold of what you have inside. If you'd like to learn more about it, you could go to rachelflowersfilm.com and write to me and let me know what you think. Bye.
So then this is the first track off her solo album from like 4 years ago. So, pretty good. Now, here she is performing at Keith Emerson. If you know anything about this music, this is all Keith Emerson composition. So he died like 2 months before this, and then she's asked to play live. They play for like 3 minutes, and then it's her turn. And she starts playing, and literally within 10 seconds, she starts to break down. Literally, she has to play, and like her portions keep coming up, and then she does it. She makes it through. look, if you think that she's this... Anyway, here she's playing Keith's gear. Got some kick. I think if she wanted to, she would destroy us all. God, I love it. So anyway, do me a favor. If you dig any of that, go check her out and buy her record, man. She's got 2 now. She's got she sings really good now too on this second album. And there are a couple of hits on there. But unfortunately for her, anyway, her name is Rachel, Rachel, no E rather. Flowers, plural. Rachel Flowers. Just go find her if you dig her stuff and help support her, because she's lost, we're in clown world, right? Partly because of this media thing as well, but for many reasons. She just she drew the short straw. And even though she's done all this, and she appears to be the sweetest, most amazing, mad scientist of all time, like I say, she could destroy us all. So you had better go pay what little pittance you can to her, okay? Anyway, so to move on. Now, this March, Freedom March, which occurred, like I say, back, I think it was Saturday, this was 2 weekends ago, just the 24th, so less than 2 weeks ago. And let me tell you something. I'm just going to play it, some of this, I'll just play it at double speed here. So I want you to just take a look. This is one guy's video. It's actually Neil Smith, 2006 here. That's the source of this particular video. And now we're going a little fast, so you might miss a sign or two here, or maybe a girl might flash or something, and you'll be like, hey, stop it right there, pause. Wait, whoa, here's something. Child sex trafficking. Whoa, damn. Should scare you more than, damn, I'm doing it to myself. But anyway, take a look at this. First of all, what do you notice? No masks, right? Now, this is more than one person, but I had read and seen in the comments with some of these videos from different places, people who had drones and stuff, and were saying, I flew my drone, couldn't find the end of this thing. And this wasn't the only boulevard that they were traipsing down. There's no masks. And also, look at the people and look at the vibe. It's looking pretty cool. Like, it's pretty decent. For Brits, right? In the city of London. Come on, right? And there's a lot of, I think, respect and admiration for American culture and American people going on with this group too, based on some of the slogans and some of the, I guess, memes, if you will, which I think, it was touching to see some of the things I saw. And, not to mention that it was all very upbeat, and it just goes and goes. This is double speed. And just look at that. No to vaccine passports, right? A lot of homemade signs on cardboard, but a lot of custom-made stuff as well. And just a lot of people. Anyway, what I was reading was 500,000 is the estimate, but it could have been more than that. And this is just the one thing that happened here just in London. And in other parts of London, there were some small things that were happening, and some larger things, and in other areas of the UK. So it's never going to be, we're never going to know how many people there were. And just look at them. They look like cool people too. Everyone's kind of like right on. And there's no, COVID is a hoax. Yeah, the government is lying to you. And you know what? That could be a shill. I don't think it is though. There's probably some shills in this group here and there, but think how tiny they must have felt. When you're going this big. The shills are going to be like, they can. I mean, even the guys over at the James Randi Educational Foundation can't. That's a shout out to those people. Good, strong shilling. Strongest shilling I ever saw. I don't ever recommend going over there. It's unless you're a pro. You got to be a real pro. They broke me a number of times, and I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed, actually. So there it is. And let me tell you, you can keep watching and watching and watching it. And when I saw there was a drone that went up over this thing, and they just rose up above the building level and then started going straight down. And all I saw toward the end was just like a gray, kind of amalgamation of people as the thing went going. And I couldn't see the end of it. The drone could have just continued on, but it was a lot of people. Now, here's the thing. Like James Corbett, I don't believe public protests have any appreciable effect, okay? Anti-war, civil rights, gay rights, it's all played out. And I'm thinking of those yellow vest guys over in France and also Occupy Wall Street as examples. However, I've since revised my views on protests or demonstrations over certain issues, and I can come back to that. But here's a question to consider. Does a protest or march take place if the media doesn't report on it? It's kind of like, does the Pope shit in the woods? It's that kind of thing. And I kind of think it does, but only because we can get some sneaky evidence based on what little things that are uploaded to YouTube and other platforms, okay? So, again, they had this event, and I think it's pretty dope. Now, am I crazy? Or did some of that footage come off as almost good news? And good news doesn't sell. Maybe that's why the U.S. media didn't pay it much attention. Fear is always a big seller, maybe the biggest seller. And conflict is maybe the next. So if those protests involved something to fear or a conflict of some kind, might they have, let's say, lured the media out of their huts and into reporting on it? And you know what? I think I have an example of what may have occurred to do just that. Let's take a look here. Let's switch to the web. I'm using my Brave browser. COVID-19 protesters exploit Holocaust symbols. Nice. Look at this. Literally anti-Semitism. That's the takeaway from what you just watched. It was like, oh my God, the anti-Semites. Let's move on to another headline. I like this one because it kind of starts out harsh, but then it kind of lifts up at the end there, kind of throws us a bone. COVID denialism. The right-wing freedom movement winning hearts and minds. So they get a little sweet at the end, but it's pretty bitter to begin with. And continuing on, anti-lockdown protesters wear Nazi yellow stars in sick vaccine stunt. Wow. Protesters were pictured smiling. Whoa. Okay, who is this? The Mirror. Oh, you sons of... They should be ashamed of themselves, literally. Police look for 9 people after worst violence in years at anti-lockdown protests. And I want to make something clear. I saw this clip here. It's short. And it looks like these people are literally like attacking this group of police that are clustered together like, help! One guy's got a bloody face. And then there's some people that step in and block this, because what happened is the cops came in to a tiny little group that had kicked off in Hyde Park. It was not associated with what we were looking at a moment ago. And the cops were brutalizing, or at least they were being a little bit, okay, you've had enough. That's all right. Go ahead and head out. Go. And they're like, screw you. That's not going to happen. And, some people threw some stuff. And, okay, yeah, oh, right, where it's the end of the world. We had 9 people get hurt, cops, all of them. I mean, they started out being assholes, but they got smacked in the face with bottles and things a little bit. But if 500,000 people had a good time, I mean, that's not as bad as... There's worse crap happening at a Britney Spears... Not Britney Spears anymore, but back in the day at a Britney Spears concert. There'd be a Christina Aguilera concert would have had more violence, potentially. Or criminality, certainly more lurid behavior. 8 police officers hurt after bottles thrown at anti-lockdown protests. So you can see here, Take off your mask was being chanted, they say here as well. So I'm going to wrap this up now, but I just figured that could be some good news. I think that those people doing this thing were actually, it was hard to even think of this as England, because as I say, I think that England should just be ended, and it's sad, but I really do. At this point, and I learned, partly because of the big shock I went through realizing that England isn't the kindly old grandfatherly country we thought they were, or at least I thought they were up until very recently. But the more I look at it, the more I realize that no, and I'm very sorry to, there are a lot of cool people, there's Monty Python, there's Patrick McGoohan. Anyway, there's Oasis, for God's sakes. I bet there are a lot cooler people now, the Oasis guys. But anyway, thank you very much. I'm going to end it here. And go out and get some Rachel Flowers music. Or, check it out. See if I need to go do it myself. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do, if it's going to be doing a SoundCloud thing or getting her stuff stream or buying a CD or her documentary DVD. Check it out. I mean, talk about an amazing. She dreams in sounds and ideas. She doesn't dream in visuals. And, maybe that has something to do with her amazing talent at music. Anyway, see you next time.
I understand. Look, it's a new world.
One.